everybody. My name is Mr. Miles. Welcome back to Pal Science Experiments. I guess I should be calling it Pal Science Nature Walks these days, though, because truth be told, I haven't really been in the mood to stay inside and do experiments very much. I just want to be outside in the beautiful sun, in the beautiful air, and listening to the beautiful birds. So today was going to be another outside video. But what I'm going to do this time is, instead of pointing out very specific things to try to look for, instead, we're going to look at some different plants, and I'm going to tell you some of the things that botanists and plant scientists use to identify plants. Because you see, nowadays, a lot of times plant identification is done in a laboratory. You pluck off a little bit of the leaf, you splice the DNA, and you look at it in a computer, and it tells you what plant it is. But you don't have access to that stuff when you're outside here, and a lot of us don't have access to it at all. So you got to use some old school ways of identifying plants. You got to look at some characteristics of those plants. So we're going to look at some of those characteristics today. So keep on watching for some cool plant content. So the first thing you want to think about is whether you have a seed plant or a not seed plant. So seed plants are most plants. So trees are seed plants. Grass is a seed plant. Flowers are seed plants. Most of the things we think of as plants are seed plants. So a good example of a non-seed plant would be the ferns. Ferns reproduce with spores. They don't have seeds. So that's one category that you can look at when deciding how to classify a plant. So once you've decided that you have a seed plant, once you know that that's what it is, there's another category we can split them up to, and that is into, here's some fancy science words for you now, they can be either gymnosperms or angiosperms. So a gymnosperm is something like a pine tree. So it's something that doesn't have fruit. So you know how pine trees make pine cones instead of fruit? Well, that's why it's not a angiosperm, it's a gymnosperm. Now, a good example of an angiosperm is pretty much everything else. So my flowers in my little planter, those are angiosperms. And the grass, those are all angiosperms. And if we look at some of the other flowers that I've grown, these are all angiosperms. So it's a pretty big group, and it includes a lot of different plants. So the next thing we're going to look at is simple leaves versus compound leaves. So simple leaves are ones that are kind of like this, where only one leaf is growing out of the branch at a time. There's a lot of leaves on the branch, but only one is coming out of any given spot on the branch. Whereas compound leaves are a lot more complicated. So see how that's where the leaves break off, but then within the leaves, there's all these sort of mini leaves or leaflets. So that's another way we can use to classify different plants. They can have either simple leaves or they can have compound leaves. So the next thing we can look for is whether our plant has opposite leaves or alternate leaves. And what that means is where the leaves are positioned on the stem. So plants with opposite leaves kind of look like this fern here. So the leaves are sticking out exactly opposite each other along every point on the branch. But plants with alternate leaves look kind of like this one, where if you look closely at the tip here, you can see that they kind of go on an every other pattern, up, down, up, down, up, down. They're not directly opposite each other in pairs. And there's one more type of leaf arrangement I want to show you, but it's a little bit harder to cut down, so I'm going to take you somewhere else to show that. Our last type of leaf arrangement is what we see here, and this is a whorl arrangement. This means that they all come out going all around the branches instead of coming out off of either side of it. So this one's a little bit easier to see from above, which is why I took you over to the plant instead of trying to cut any of it down. So the last thing you want to look for is for different types of inflorescences. So inflorescence is a fancy word that means the way that the flowers are growing. So I'm going to go ahead and put some pictures up for inflorescences rather than trying to hold my phone up really, really close, because really photos are going to do it a much better justice. So there's two different types of inflorescences that we can look for. Number one are simple inflorescences, which means that there's only one flower growing out of the whole little bunch of flowers. There's only one. The second type that we can look at are complex inflorescences. And these are where the flowers grow in a whole big bunch, and there's more than one of them. Now within these, there's lots of different categories for how their shapes are. But just in the beginning, we're just going to think about whether they are simple or complex. So what I would like you to do on your next nature walk, or even your next trip into your backyard, is take a look at some of the plants that you see around you and see if you can identify those characteristics that real plant scientists use to identify plants. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. My name is Mr. Miles, and see you next time.